It's been 3 months since Taylor Swift released her 12th studio album, The Life of a Showgirl, and a lot of people didn't like it. And it's kind of easy to see why at the time, but I want to kind of revisit it. Do I think it was the worst album that she's ever made? No. But I do think it's in the bottom half of her album set list so far. I can see why a lot of people didn't like it at the time, but I do think that some of the hate was overdone. And sorry to the Taylor Swift fans, I do think it's probably in her like bottom three out there, in my opinion. But that's just because I think a lot of her other albums were better, and a lot of the concerns that people voiced at the time are pretty valid even to now. But I wanted to kind of give my thoughts on it, revisiting the topic and seeing like what we think about it now versus what the consensus was back then. So the biggest gripe that everybody had back then, and I think is still pretty relevant, is the lyrics from the songs. I don't think that a lot of her songs were that bad, but the main three that came to my mind whenever I listened to this album are going to be from Honey, going to be from Wood, and Father Figure. And I also remember these being some of the most controversial ones. Maybe not Honey, but the last two for sure. Starting off with Honey, the reason why I think that the lyrics are kind of weak on it is just because I feel like the rhymes aren't as good as some of her normal songs are. The one quote that really sticks to my mind is the constant lyric that she says in it, which is, "You can call me honey if you want because I'm the one you want." I think it's kind of a weak line, and it just kind of sucks because it's the main line that helps paint the message of the song. But I just think that, I don't know, it doesn't really flow well, and it kind of throws me off whenever I'm listening to the song. I know my girlfriend, she adores that song just because she really likes the message, and she also saw the documentary, which helped give a little bit of a background to the song. But me personally, I feel like every single time I hear that lyric, I'm just like kind of thrown off, and I'm just shocked, you know. Like, song ain't for me, I guess. Next song I wanted to talk about is Wood, and this is everybody's favorite song to hate on. And if in case you don't know, the song Wood is obviously like a metaphor for Travis Kelce's guy downstairs. And as to why Taylor Swift wrote this song dedicated to that, I don't know. But I've seen a lot of like mixed reviews about this song. My girlfriend, she enjoys the song. She thinks it's fun. She thinks it's funny and catchy. And I have some friends who are also Swifties that have talked to me about this song, and they're like, "Hey, it's actually pretty good." And they're like, "You wouldn't get it since you're not seeing it from the perspective of a girl who's in a serious relationship and that wants to like have this physical attraction, who wants to have a sexual relationship with another person." And to that I say, you know, that's probably a fair point, but I just think that the lyrics that she uses and the analogies for it just shy away from like who Taylor Swift has been and who she was. And like obviously everybody's favorite lyric to make fun of is the one where she's saying a few rhymes about a redwood tree, which is obviously referring to Travis. And then the next famous line that goes, "His love was the key that opened my thighs." Now, the song pretty catchy, and even when she's saying this bar, kind of catchy, but it's still just like just a crazy sentence to hear from like a Taylor Swift song. Because if you know anything about her, like her music has always been like talking about breakups and being like, you know, like screw him, like I'm independent, like I can do this, like having me is just enough. And then this album just kind of like flips that narrative on its head, especially with this song where she's saying that like she needed him, and this was great, you know, the key to open my thighs. Like kind of a crazy bar from Taylor Swift. Obviously that's not to say that she can't say that or she can't feel that way. It's just way out of left field from what her previous messages were sending. The next song I want to talk about is Father Figure. And now I kind of understand the message of this song, but again, her choice of lyrics are kind of crazy for who Taylor Swift is. And the one bar that I want to talk about in this song is where she's saying something about like, I can be my own father figure, like, and then she says, I can make deals with the devil because my dick's bigger. Now, I can see why a lot of people had concerns and criticisms about this verse, and I do think that it's pretty funny. I think it's kind of ironic, especially because, you know, she's a woman. She doesn't have a dick, but The amount of hate that she got for this line alone, I don't know, man. I felt like people were just waiting for their moment to just like criticize her on anything. And when the lyrics kind of just went down in this album, people were just nitpicking at everything. And then this line popped up, and everybody was like, "Oh, this is like the gold mine, you know? Like this is this is our Watergate. Like this is how we're gonna take her down, you know?" I want to say it's probably because of Wood and Father Figure that her own like fan base didn't even defend her, because normally they go crazy in the comments, but this time around they kind of just agreed or just didn't stop these people from commenting. And then also again earlier I was talking about how the theme of this album is kind of like backwards for Taylor Swift, because a lot of her previous music, you know, was talking about how she can be her own self, and how like she's learned and grown so much, and how she's like fiercely independent. And then with this song, she literally has a song called "The Fate of Ophelia," where she talks about how Travis's love saved her from having like this horrible ending, and which is kind of crazy because everything beforehand was she didn't need nobody else, you know. And then to start off this album, like that song being there, obviously, you know, times have changed. She's grown, and her opinions can change. And that's not to say that this is bad. Like she can have anybody help her or have her feel saved, but it's just from her fan base. Like this is one of the criticisms that they talked about, and even something that like I noticed was just like the theme of it. Do I think it's a bad theme? No. For who Taylor Swift was at the time before she released this song, kind of a crazy transition, but I digress. Now I want to focus on the things that I thought she did really well for this album. And the first thing I got to talk about is the beats. Like, even though the songs that we mentioned before, like the lyrics weren't that great, you got to admit that the beats were kind of catchy, you know? I'll be singing Along the Wood, and, you know, sometimes I'm like, dang, bro, these lyrics aren't it, but hey, man, at least it got me moving, you know? And my favorite song of the album's got to be Opalite. Like, that one is just all around 10 out of 10, like Taylor Swift song. You know, you got your classic beats, you got your lyrics, and I just think it's like a really fun song just in general. Fate of Ophelia also deserves a shout out. I was having a discussion with one of my friends who's huge Swiftie, and I was telling her how I thought personally that Opalite was the best song of the album, but she was kind of like arguing with me, and she was like to the death about it. She was like, "Nah, the Fate of Ophelia's got to be number one." And I guess I should have asked her more like why she thought that. And I mean, I think it's a good like number two, number three song of the album. Is it my personal favorite? No. I think it's pretty catchy, but it's not like as fun as Opalite is, in my opinion. And then the last thing that I thought she did really well was the song Ruin the Friendship. And I think that this one personally had the best lyrics out of the whole album. And it's got like the best story. Basically, the premise of the song is that in these moments where you're friends with somebody else and you catch feelings for them, that it's always better to just put your feelings out there, because you'll never know like what could have happened. And I think it's super relatable. I bet almost everybody's been in this position where they've had a really good girl space friend, and instead of putting their feelings out there, you know, they never said it. I guess I'm just looking at it from the guy perspective, but even from girl perspective, you know, like maybe they had a really good guy friend and they never put their feelings out there. Or for anybody out there, homosexual, heterosexual, any relationship that could have been there, you know, where you had somebody that you really cared about and you just never told them how you felt, and then you look back on it and you're like, wow, I wonder if anything could have happened. I think it's a really good message, and it's also kind of fun because she pokes fun of like some of the moments where she's like, yeah, like your ex would have been mad at me, probably because most of the time whenever they're in a relationship with somebody else, you know, they feel like, oh, that best friend is trying to steal them away from me, because, you know, they can tell that they have feelings even though the main person can't. And so I think it was just a really well done song. And personally, I feel for these last few things that I mentioned, that this album can't be the worst one in my opinion. I still think that she's had way better albums in general, just because some of her other albums have just had like a lot more songs, so it makes it easier for them to just have higher floors than this one, because it was so small. And the gripes that we mentioned earlier, like they're pretty valid. I just can't rank it towards the top. But for me, like one thing I haven't listened to yet is really old Taylor Swift. I think, what are their fans called? I haven't listened to many of those songs, if like any of them at all. And so it's really hard for me to just give an honest reaction, especially just because like those old Taylor Swift songs versus like the newer ones have like two different tones, and especially depending on like what mood I'm in, like I can say like one album's my favorite now, and like in a week I'll be like, oh, it's actually this one, you know. But I do think that looking back on it now, some of the criticism was unfair, and I do think that Taylor Swift did produce like a pretty decent album. Is it up to par for who Taylor Swift is and what her fans expect out of her? Probably not. But I would still say that out of 2025 albums, like this one has to be in like the top 15. I think those are all my thoughts about it, visiting the album again. I really hope that the Swifties don't get mad, and I hope some of them kind of open up their eyes a little bit and be like, you know, like maybe we should have defended her a little bit more, because I think y'all should have. Anyways, it's whatever. I hope you guys have a great day, and thank you for watching.